I can't wait for you to hear this conversation I had with Dr. Yulinda Renee Rockman, and she is affectionately called Dr. U Rock. Uh, a wonderful example of how to get in touch with your sexual side after sexual trauma and abuse. She has an amazing story of her own journey into this very specific field of sexology and 20 plus years in the mental health field. I just know you're going to love this conversation. We even go so far as to talk about going into a dungeon in San Francisco. I can't wait. Here's my conversation with Dr. U Rock. I am so excited to have Dr. Yulinda Renee Rockman with me today. Thank you for joining me.
No, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I love the fact that a lot of people in your life, your clients and family, you've become known as Doctor or Doc You Rock because the
Yeah.
Y U from Yulinda and the Rock from Rockman. So I love that people call you Doctor You Rock.
Yes.
And I got the opportunity to sit in at one of our live events on our online community, Thrivivors, where you gave a presentation to whoever wanted to come in our membership community and hear about eating disorders and how sexual trauma can be one of those things that causes us to have eating disorders and what they were and how you talked about it was so interesting and so fascinating. So I know that you have a background there. We could talk a little bit about that and that wonderful live event and all the great questions that you answered and the many things we talked about. But you also have this wonderful background, not only the fact that you're a counselor, but yet you do what you, at least I think this is what you say, you are board certified as a kink conscious sex therapist and
Yes.
licensed educator with a doctorate in clinical sexology.
Yes.
Ms. Doctor, you rock. You are for sure that rockin' wonderful therapist that I've been looking for all my life. What a resume. I mean, what an interesting thing to go into. Do you have a personal or some reason why you chose this particular field and that particular specialty field inside of this field?
Sorta, yes. So when I was in private practice, most of my clientele has some form of sexual trauma, right? And so because of that, I'm like, well, I feel like I need to go back to school, get my education up. And so I went back for clinical sexology, but then we had an opportunity to pick a track, right? And so out of the tracks, I'm like, kink, that sounds interesting, right? So I figured
So
yeah, having a space because people who identify as kinky often get judged, right? And because people have preconceived notions of what it means to be in that community, I wanted to be someone that could create a safe space for them to show up as themselves.
so inside of sexology, this is actually an even more specific field. Can you tell us, like, give us some kind of a definition of
Mhm.
king conscious
Well,
sex
yeah.
therapy?
So, kink conscious basically means that you are conscious of what it means to be a part of this community. And being kink just means that you are not engaging in normative sexual, activities, whatever norm is, right? So it's a kink. You're not on the straight and narrow, right? So someone who might engage in BDSM practices, someone who might be in non-monogamous relationships, someone who might have fetishes would be considered kink. And someone who's conscious of that is just conscious of what it means to be a part of those different.
Okay, okay, so interesting. So in other words, just not your regular old missionary style, sex. We're not talking about that.
I mean, could, depending on what you add to it. But yes, typically not vanilla, right? Yes.
Yeah, it's just not vanilla, which is
Mhm.
awesome because that's my least favorite flavor.
I love that.
So in that, you're trying to help somebody therapeutically be okay with some kind of a kink or a fetish or a whatever and find a partner that also is okay with that. How does that work in a a therapeutic setting and a session?
Well, that could be part of it. So if someone comes to me and they're kinky or they identify as kinky and they have a partner and they want to introduce that part of themselves to their partner who might be vanilla, it's simply a conversation. Well, I say simply, but it's having a conversation to see if your partner is open to all parts of you, right? I mean, being kinky can be considered something like, well, I like books, right? Or I'm into tech, right? Is your partner willing to hold space for all of your different identities, right? And if they're not, then what do we do with that? Like if someone doesn't like the fact that I'm intellectual, then maybe we're not meant to be in partnership.
Okay. So a lot of it is relationship based. It's like how to decide, is this relationship actually going to work for me and for you? And then where do you go from there?
Well, some of it might be if you have someone in a DNS dynamic, so a dom and a sub, right? If they're in a
Okay.
dynamic,
Mhm.
they might come to counseling because they might just be having relationship issues, but they come to someone who will understand the dynamic that they're in and not judge them for that dynamic, but they still have regular relationship issues like you don't put the seat down or you're not helping pay the bills. We just happen to be
Mhm.
in a dynamic that most people aren't familiar with, right?
So so when they identify as kinky and they come to you and they say, "Look, we're in this. I'm the dominant. This person is the sub. The sub." I'm not even sure the right terms. It almost always is not necessarily about their sex life.
Typically, it's not.
That's so fascinating. I love hearing that. That really, no matter however we identify, and boy, do we have a lot of ways to identify,
Mhm.
we all share pretty much the same kinds of, problems, or trauma,
Mhm.
some trauma that's might be based in one or both, people's past. All of those things play into our relationship. So in the end, like you were so good at talking about, like, eating disorders and inside of the world of, having been sexually abused, because that's what my membership community is, people who are trying to thrive, you know, on the other side of trauma. And how do you thrive? What do you have to work on, to heal, to be a happy, healthy person for yourself and then in a relationship, you
Mhm.
know? And eating disorders came up. Do you see that a lot in the kinky world as well?
As far as eating
People
disorders? Yes,
Just curious.
actually, I actually have a client, I have a couple of clients, right, that found me on FetLife. So FetLife is basically Facebook for kinky folks, right? It's
Okay.
a social media platform. And one of the people who found me on there for services came to me because of the eating disorder that they have, right? They binge eat because of their sexual trauma and they were looking for someone in the kink space who could hold space for all of their identities. But yes, they were suffering from this eating disorder. They would get to a certain size and they would sabotage, right? Because
Oh,
they were
that's
trying to
really,
protect. Yeah.
yeah, really interesting, trying to protect themselves,
Hmm.
basically.
Yes.
Sabotaging relationship at all
Hmm.
is it's better to have, nothing and to just be on your own than to have to sometimes deal with the issues that are at hand. So,
Hmm.
sexual trauma, is your background, did it start because of seeing so many people that were in that space of having sexual trauma? Like, childhood sexual trauma is what I'm always talking about, because for me, that's my only experience I can speak from, and
Hmm.
knowing that you can come to, the other side of it, not meaning to say that you're, somebody, pushes on your. And says you're healed,
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
like that. I think it takes its journey, throughout your life to continually, be able to look at your mental health and your healing state and finding the
Hmm.
right fit for a therapist. But because you're a specialist, because that is part of your, I mean, we have this really fun one over here that I wanted to know more about, and I still feel like there's a lot of questions I have there. But just to get sort of, some of the breadth of all of your experience, is that, sexual trauma is your research. You
Hmm.
are a researcher of sexual
Yes.
trauma.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, when did that become a thing? Was it before you decided, "Now I'm gonna go and this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life?" Or did it come out of a personal experience, maybe you or for a loved one or anybody in your life? What drew you to that
Well, both of them. It is
research?
experience as well. I'm a survivor, thriviver, right? Sexual
Yes.
trauma myself. And, I'm pretty sure that I know I've experienced it at 13. I'm pretty sure I experienced it before, but I have no recollection of most of my childhood. So, but I can
Right.
feel it in the body because a lot of our trauma lives in the body. So there's that. And then it's also because I know there's so much prevalence that is not being talked about. So I wanted to begin to really have the conversation, and because it's difficult to thrive in a silo, it's difficult to thrive in darkness, right? When you're not willing to confront the issue. So it was both personal and it was necessary.
Okay, that's great. So, as you remember 13, so you
Mhm,
know about that trauma, and you spoke about, I know it because it lives in my body, that I had other trauma before that. Can you
mhm,
describe what you mean when you say it lives in the body? I believe that too, but
mhm.
just in your experience with maybe a little more of a professional explanation of what that means.
Yeah. So for me, just looking at some of my triggers and my patterns. So I am and at first we just think, oh, this is just who I am, but I'm very touch averse, right? Like even
Mm,
with my children, like they ask for hugs, right? Because I'm very touch averse, is one thing. I'm very I can be very disconnected in relationships, right? I keep people at a distance when we talk about like attachment styles. I'm very avoidant, or I
mhm.
can be. Um, my libido was very low when I was growing up. I thought something was wrong with me because, when we think about sexual trauma, sometimes it can be hypersexual when you want lots of sex, and then it can be hypo when you're not really interested in sex. And that was my experience, but I didn't connect it to my traumas in my 20s. I just thought something was wrong with me. Right. And so these are some of the things that I expressed. I thought it was asexual before that was even something people were talking about. Um,
Yeah.
my own sabotage with my eating disorder, right? I started developing an eating disorder in single digits, right? My relationship with food and wanting to really protect my body or to punish my body for something that, again, I hadn't connected the dots. I just knew that I had a really like hateful relationship with my body, and so I wanted it to look a certain way. And so I punished it through food.
Oh, that's interesting, and you said single digits, so before the age of 10, you're
Mhm.
talking.
Yes.
Wow, that's really young
Hmm.
to start having that kind of a body image that is, where you will destructively, you know,
Hmm.
stop eating or
Yes.
binge eating. Either way, I guess both are destructive, but, we often think of an eating disorder as, being on the one side of things, but it can be it can manifest in so many different ways, which is what you brought out in that conversation that we had, with our membership community because we get so lucky to have generous people who want to share with other survivors of sexual assault, violence, and abuse, mostly as children. That's
Mhm.
our focus, although we have a few people that it was a little bit older when they experienced their sexual violence. But still, when the brain is forming, I consider 25 and under to be just still
Yes.
so deeply affected by sexual assault, violence, and abuse. So without remembering, that in your body, by the way you responded to your body, punished your body, that there was more than just what
Yes.
you actually have explicit memories of at
Yes.
age 13.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's really a great way to let people know out there that if you're experiencing this, it might be because of something that you haven't been able to either remember or that you hadn't even associated it as this came out of having this sexual trauma. That's a really great thing for
Yes.
people to know. Where would they go first? What would they do first if they thought, I think that my trauma is affecting my life right now because of the way I'm eating or not eating or I have a libido, I have no libido. Where would you tell them to go first? What were the steps if you were to say, here's the first step?
Yeah, a lot of it is being aware, right? Being aware of our patterns, really, because then I wasn't aware of what was happening. I wasn't aware of the patterns. So really paying attention to what you do, what you're triggered by, how do you find yourself coping? Is food a way you cope? Is drugs a way you cope? Is drinking a way you cope? Is isolation a way you cope? Like really paying attention and collecting data on yourself can help inform where some of these patterns might be coming from. So I always invite people to start really take an inventory of how they show up, when they show up, and how they behave and their responses to certain stimuli, and just beginning to collect that data.
So collect data. That's really good. I used to tell people, write things down. Just write it down. Like today I feel this way. And then if tomorrow you have this other thing. And then, by the time you've done that for, a few weeks and you can kind of see your patterns, you can go, yeah, something is chronic. It comes over and over again. And I really don't want to have this be my chronic life,
Mhm.
I really like that because I think a lot of times we will hear about narrative therapy where we write a lot and we're telling our story, and that's good. That can be really good. But for some people, like you seem like a very logical, no nonsense person. You're very warm, which surprises me that that you're very averse to touch because I wouldn't see you that way. Like if I were to see you on the street, I'd be like, doctor, you rock. Here, give me a big old hug. That's how I would respond because you're
Uh-huh.
so bright, with your smile and your laughing and just what you do for a living. It just makes me smile. So how did you know that you I don't know that you've necessarily changed that adverse, touch thing that you are necessarily, but you have children.
Mhm.
So, somehow you got touched,
Mhm.
and you had some kids, and they wanna touch you, and they want mama to give me a hug, but they have to ask. Tell me how you, what were your first, like, "Oh gosh, I gotta make some changes here," and where did you seek some help?
Yeah, well, I
I always
have
think it's
3
interesting to
girls.
find out where the therapist gets their help, other
Yes.
therapists.
Sometimes, actually, if I had to pick, it would probably be my children, right? Because I mean, I have 3 girls and I wanted boys because you can be technically, right, when we think about society or whatever, you can be a bit more not standoffish, but less connective, I guess, like less warm, like that's acceptable, right? But with girls, like they want
Mhm.
the hugs, they want the affection. And so I was like, "Oh, you're so funny. You gave me 3 girls." And it's forced me.
Pointing up to God.
Yes,
She's pointing
exactly.
to she's pointing to heaven.
You're so
"What? I
funny.
wanted boys." We're not gonna let your
Exactly.
daughters hear this podcast because we don't want to make them feel bad.
No, they understand that they saved me. Like we've had the conversation, right? They understand because of them, they really, I don't want to say forced, but invited me to look at myself and my patterns, like to really ask myself, like, where's that coming from, you? And like, why is it that you flinch when people get close to you? Like, what is that really about? Right. And because I have girls and because I want to make sure that they receive the affection that they're looking for, that I'm meeting them where they're at and meeting their needs, it really required me to figure out what was going on for me. So because of them, they've had me or invited me to really look at myself to collect that data that I mentioned.
Oh, so your girls said, "Mama, you gotta figure out what this is," and you were already a therapist, I believe.
Mhm. Yes.
This is kind of you've already I mean, that's a lot of schooling, to have this many degrees in these things does not is not like it's not a 4-year program. How long were you in school? I mean, how what is that like to become, a PhD in sexology?
Well, I
Just
started in December of 2017 and I finished February of this year. I walked across the stage. Yeah.
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a long
That's
process.
fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
And there's the
yeah.
reason I continue to go because I would have quit a long time ago. I'm like, I'm doing it for my children. I'm doing it for my children. They motivate me to keep
Ah,
going. Yeah, because it was difficult.
yeah, I bet. And are you a single mama or no?
No, I'm partnered, but their father transitioned, meaning he's no longer here. He passed away, but we were divorced for about 8 years. I don't feel like doing the math, but then he passed away
Yeah.
last year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that's a lot going on and still getting through your program and you're getting your degree and boy, I bet you did have to kind of pull it together and say to yourself, a lot of times I really am doing this for almost someone else because I get that way where I
Mhm.
feel like what I've set out to do that I really want to help other people. I want them to be able to find their healing path and their joy and their excitement about life and that it is possible, because
Mhm.
some people are stuck in it's not possible,
Yes.
but there are times when I want to quit that I think, it's too hard. You know,
Mhm,
it life is a challenge for sure.
mhm,
So, yeah, I'm sorry that you went through all of that, and I'm also in awe of who you are, and that you completed this, and that now here you are, and we are the lucky recipients of your wisdom, your life experience, and your girls on some level. Because without them, we wouldn't be
yeah,
here. That's
exactly.
amazing.
Yes.
I feel like, for me, having a child was one of the most, um, I don't know if it was a healing thing as much as it was I want to make sure that I'm okay for so that I can be a good mother or whatever. It was a really, like, in my face kinda thing,
Mhm,
as he, came into the world, and I got asked to speak at a little book club. I was living in Florida working like, been working at Disney World, singing and dancing until, I was showing, and then, "Oh, no, we'll pay you, go away." You know?
mhm,
And, but that was really the first time that I ever was asked to publicly kinda share my story, and I didn't have a book, I didn't have anything, but I remember taking that little person in that little baby carrier into the little room with a bunch of most of them were single, not too many of those gals, they were all in the entertainment area, whether they were
mhm,
entertainers at the park or they were stage managers or other pieces of that, they were in the entertainment field, and I was so shocked at the questions they asked. And I thought,
mhm.
"Oh, maybe I do have something to say that's of value, that's worthwhile." And I know that you've written a book, and I'm really curious about this because I love the title of your book. So it's about trauma and healing, and it's called A Power Exchange with Your Pain, a guide towards reconciliation.
Mhm.
That is one of the most beautiful titles I've ever heard. Oh my gosh, tell me, how did that come to you, and how did you know that it is like an exchange? You exchange your power for pain or your pain for power. Because when I read that, and I'm getting chills again, like, all the little goose bumples around my
Mhm.
arms, because when I read it the very first time, I was like, and this was before you even did your, thing for our community, did your, eating disorder, program for us, or presentation. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to ask, I hope she wants to be on the podcast," and here you are. How did you come up with that?
Well, that was through King Consciousness because it's a power exchange when we think about the BDSM dynamic. And what it's really about was introducing the idea of therapeutic BDSM, right? Because when a part of my training, when I was doing that certification, was to go to San Francisco. I went to some of the dungeons, I went to some of the events. And what I saw was those in play or creating a scene, like there was this catharsis that I was seeing experienced in real time. And I was thinking to myself when I did my research, I wonder how this could be used to help those who've experienced sexual trauma to release the pain that is often stored in the body. How can BDSM be shaped in a way that could be therapeutic? And I was thinking about being able to create any type of scene that can be imagined to help someone re-script their relationship with themselves and with their trauma is where that came from.
Wow, that's really interesting. So for our listeners that are not familiar with BDSM, would you please, I know we've kind of already touched on it, but would you just explain that one more time so that people know and have the context for what we're talking about?
Yes. So the acronym BDSM, B stands for bondage, D stands for discipline or dominant. The S stands for sadomasochism, right? Or submissive. And then the M is for masochist. So when we talk about sadomasochism, that's someone who receives pleasure from administering pain or punishment, right? And a masochist is someone who receives pleasure from being on the receiving end of pain or punishment. And so when I reimagined this, it's about creating scenes. So if we're thinking about pain or punishment and someone administering that, it would be more so of someone you exchanging power when it comes to authority or when it comes to sensation or when it comes to someone or bondage or discipline. It's an exchange of these different areas. So if we're going to do an exchange of sensation, if you were in a situation and you had trauma, And during that traumatic experience, someone put their hand around your neck, right? And now you're touch averse when it comes to someone putting anything, or even maybe you can't even wear high t-shirts because you're feeling or you're triggered or traumatized. In a scene, someone could begin to apply or even kind of touch around your neck, but you have created a scene where you, at any point in time, you can say, stop, slow down, move back, or, change your touch. So it really allows you to be the authority in this scene where you can re-script that trauma narrative in real time.
That's really, really interesting. That's incredible. Do you do similar work like that in the office space? I
Yeah,
mean, as
no.
you were watching that, do you actually re-script things? Or that's so because, I live my life by a script. I'm an actor. And re-scripting something in your life is for sure something
Mhm,
that we've talked about. Like, you can recreate
mhm,
what happened in the past. If it's harming you in the present, we gotta re-narrate this, recreate it, configure it so that you're
mhm.
back in the power seat of your life, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah, how did you take it from, going like into the dungeons or
Mhm,
into those clubs or whatever you would somebody else might call them, where
mhm,
you were seeing these stories, you were seeing this and going, gosh, there must be a connection to trauma.
mhm,
Because, you often, when I talk to people, I often hear things like, if I just wouldn't have been so stupid, or if I just would have
mhm,
done this or that. And they're literally beating themselves up with their words.
mhm,
And I'm like, wait, you got to stop. Did you
mhm,
know? No,
mhm.
you didn't. Do you want to
Exactly.
keep taking that little whip and whipping your back like that? You know? Because that's literally what people do. And this is literally physically what people were doing. So
Mhm.
this is really fascinating to me. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so there's people already doing it, but it's not under the therapeutic frame, right? Because when we think about ethics and legality. So right now the research is trying to figure out how we can bring this into the therapeutic space. But you have people who identify as coaches, who are already doing this type of work, right? You have like DOMs or dominatrix who are already doing therapeutic type practices. You have tops. So a professional top is someone who gets paid to administer these types of either bondage or any other type of sensation someone might want. A professional sub or a bottom is someone who receives this. So you have people who are already doing this in practice, but we are still working to cut through the red tape about how to do this in session because we would be touching people, right? And
Right.
that's a line we're trying to figure out how we can do ethically.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I often have said, I wish that somehow, because we've gotten so scared of touching.
Mhm.
There's so much fear around touching. Like you know, grandpas often feel like they can't hug their grandkids anymore and have them on
Mhm.
their lap. And I'm like, that would have been just so terrible if my dad wouldn't have had my little boy on his lap and they tickled backs and they rolled up,
Mhm.
sleeves. My dad liked it if he rolled up his shirt sleeve and rolled it down because it kind of tickles your arm. And he'd do the same for, all of me and my sisters, our kids. And, I'm like, wow, how do you find that balance where the whole world hasn't gotten away from touching? I mean, now that we live by our phones, it's like you can have full-on relationships and never meet a person face to face and never touch them, you know?
Mhm.
It's I don't know, there's something sad about that to me.
Mhm. It is, right? And when we think about like massage and somatics, I feel like we really need to allow ourselves to be able to engage in real life, right? Social media and all of the things is wonderful, and also really appreciating in real life, right? And that includes being able to touch. And even when you were talking about with the little kids, one of the scenes I created as an example would be something as simple as creating a scene where I am a little, right? Like I'm in my little self, I'm a little. And the person who's the top might present as my mother. And the scene could simply be me asking my mom, hey, would you spend some time with me? Because in my past, when I was abused and I asked my mom to spend time with me, she could not. And I was with the sitter, and that was when I was abused. right? But
Mhm.
now we create a scene where we can rescript that whole narrative. Now mommy says, yes, I will make time for you. And
Oh,
now,
and that really
yeah,
yeah, that would change the pathway, right? That would
yes,
definitely have a healing effect.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and, you know, I do a lot of, like, when you say the little, I say, "Well, little Jan," you know, or
Mhm.
the mama tiger took over little Jan and wrapped her up in those big furry arms and said, "You're okay, and I'm gonna make sure and defend you and protect you, and, you know,
Yes.
you're safe with me," you know, but little Jan was scared, you know, she was
Mhm.
frightened, she was hurt, you know,
Mhm.
and I think when we talk in terms like that and we actually realize that there are things that can be done to actually heal the what happened in the past, but that still it still hurts in the present. You
Mhm.
know, it really does. That's
Mhm.
the thing. It's not like you're just trying to go back through your past and dredge up things that don't hurt. You're trying to figure out how to be in your present life and be free right now.
Exactly.
You know, how
Mhm.
do I get free from, you know, some of those disappointments and those heartaches that continue to pop up and
Mhm.
to affect my life? Okay, so changing gears a little bit, so going from kind of the sexology part of your therapeutic practices, when you, did you have to go and actually, like don't most doctors or clinicians have to have on the job training?
Mhm.
Did you have to go somewhere and do this, like, under, like, with somebody else kind of watching over your shoulder?
With the sexology part, with the kink
Yeah,
part? Yeah,
yeah.
actually what, there was my professor is the one that took us to the dungeon. So we went to San Francisco and she was our like our navigator, our tour guide through the process. So we were there to observe. So we didn't actually engage in play, while we were there. We were there mostly to observe. We went to something called a munch. A munch is a basically a gathering for people who identify as kink. It might be at a Pizza Hut, or it might be at a
Yeah.
hot dog shop, but it's just really to come and have conversation with people who are similar to you, right? And so we went to one of those. So she really just exposed us to the community, right? And then we would go back and then we would have conversation, about it. Like she's taught us about like the fact that BDSM or kinkiness is ancient. Like this isn't new. People have been doing this type of stuff for eons, right? And so
Mhm.
it was a very immersive, I guess you could say, type of experience. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know that you've had, like, in the mental health, you know, as a part of your life, you've had like 20 plus years of experience in that. And now you have this additional, you know, piece with this doctorate that you have in this specific area. As you look back on the experiences that you had even before you went, you know, into this particular, you know, study of an immersive experience of, and now you're helping people in this space. What did you notice people had in common? Was it always I mean, it feels to me like there's almost always something that we all have in common, those of us who have experienced childhood sex abuse, and it is a lack of confidence, and that shows up in the bedroom as well. It
Mhm.
shows up in our personal relationships, whether we can't, you know, perform, whether we're scared. I don't know. I'm projecting, but I just wondered, did you notice that that was kind of a theme for pretty much everyone who's been through a sexually abusive situation, especially I think, you know, children, tweens, teens,
Mhm.
you know, of course rape and things as adults are just as horrible, but I feel like that gets messed up, you know, the
Mhm.
progression and you know, one step at a time and you're developing and then it's just stunted. It's just like everything stops in some
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah. The theme was a disconnect from self, which is where the book comes from, the reconciliation with self, having a relationship that's been distorted, right? And like you said, it affects everything. It affects your relationship with yourself, with others, at work, at play. It's everywhere. Like it affects every aspect of your life when you have this type of trauma. And a lot of us don't realize just how much it impacts all these different areas. We might not understand that our sexual trauma is impacting how we show up at work or in business, right? But it does. And so that was part of what I wanted to explore in that book. Like, let's see the different ways this could be impacting you, and let's figure out how we can rescript those relationships.
So that's really where the title, the power exchange of pain is how
Mhm.
you're re-scripting the titles
Mhm.
from pain to power
Exactly.
or what how that got messed up or given away or, we talk about taking our power back, and sometimes I think, but how do you actually do that? You can talk about things like that, but until somebody has an experience of feeling the power come back into their to the for me, it was a creative power. It was like,
Mm.
"Oh, I get to create." It was very obvious during this one experience that I had in a workshop that I went to, and on that kinda last day, it was like, "Oh, I get to create what happens next. I get to decide. The past is not deciding for me anymore." It was a huge revelation to me.
Yes.
But if I hadn't have gone to the workshop and done other things that I had tried, and I'd had some good therapists and other things that I had done that all helped me, but at that moment, it all culminated in, "Oh, I'm the creative force. I'm the person that gets to drive the bus of my
Yes.
life," you know? And that
Yes.
was huge for me. So that exchange of pain for power or power, how it's been taken
Mhm.
and we reclaim it is really what speaks to me, but I see what you're saying, like, how do you reconcile this reconciliation with self?
Mhm. Yes.
Because that's what's gotten out of whack. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, give me an example, a couple examples or people you've worked with or something so I can nail this down in my head, my heart, and for other people that might be
Yeah.
listening.
So what I did was I created actually a therapeutic modality called basically the same thing, self-reconciliation therapy, and it's four different pillars. First is awareness, then it's acceptance, then it's attunement and atonement. And so with that, there's a bunch of different activities. So one fun one would be like create your own oracle deck or create your own acronym. So I'm ITB, like I'm the boss, right? And you're just creating these things and like making like an alert on your phone where it pops up and you see it and it's like, oh, and it's something fun. Or I have one where you randomly put on a playlist and you allow your body to respond. Like, do you want to sway your hips? Like, do you want to nod your head? Like, what does your body want to do without you judging? Right? That's another thing, like
Mhm.
being aware without the judgment. Because a lot of time when we're working on self-awareness, we're also judging ourselves in that awareness. So how can we put that judgment on the side and just allow ourselves to be? Another
Now
activity,
that's the first pillar. Sorry, what was the first pillar? Those are
awareness.
some activities.
Yes,
Awareness. Okay, that's
yes,
pillar 1. Okay,
yeah.
those are cool. So you put the acronym, you figure out what you wanna say. "I'm a bad mother lover." I have a
Yes.
friend that says that. That's what she says all the time. She goes, "I'm just a bad mother lover." I'm like, "You're hilarious." I love that. But what you would do is you would take that and put the acronym and make it pop up on your phone every now and then. Like, you
Yeah.
can set that setting, and that starts to it makes you smile,
Yes.
or it makes you go, "Yeah, I'm powerful," or whatever it is that you created, and you
Yeah.
get reminded of it. It's like somebody reminding you of that
Mm-hmm.
all the time, which is an awareness thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really, really cool. Or okay, or the music, which I totally love because I can totally lose myself in a song, and all of a sudden I have no judgment, and people are, like, looking at me on the dance floor like, "She's crazy." That's I mean, people would not know this about me unless you really know me, but I can totally drop it like it's hot,
I
and
love
I
it.
really love it. I really do. I love to dance. And so if I were to do that, like a song would just come up, it would raise my awareness, my mood, my me, like
Mm-hmm.
how cool I am,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
Okay, I love that. Okay, awareness, pillar 1. Okay, pillar 2.
So awareness, then we have acceptance. So something might be one of the 7 days, 7 ways. So you would do 7 affirmations, you would do mirror work, right? And the thing about mirror work is that it can be triggering, right? If you're looking yourself in the mirror and you're saying, I love you, and it doesn't ring as true, this can
Yeah.
cause, and so part of it is to just do it and to journal, how did this make me feel? Did I feel like I truly love myself? Right. And just noting, and accepting whatever comes up without judgment. That's always my thing. Don't judge yourself. That was one assignment. Another could be beginning to write your story. Like, what does it look like to write my story? Right. Another is noticing your patterns. Like, what do I do if I'm stressed? Do I reach for the bottle? Do I reach for, something else? Do I work out? And just accepting that these are my patterns. This is how I act. This is how I respond. This is how I show up. But first, you have to be aware in order to begin to accept, right?
Mm, very, very true. Yes, that's
Yeah.
really good. So pillar 1, awareness, pillar 2, acceptance,
Yeah.
and mirror work. Um, my sister read that book from that gentleman who said, "Look, I'm not I have no letters after my name,
Mhm.
but I wanted to jump, I was ready to end it."
Mm,
And then something, I don't even remember how the story went, but he started to do that very thing, to look in the mirror
mhm,
and do some mirror work about, "I love myself." And he said, "I didn't believe it, but
mhm,
I committed I was gonna do it for X number of minutes, or I don't remember how many times, or
mhm.
something." And the miracle that came from doing that very thing,
Yeah.
that all of a sudden his love for himself entered. It was
Yeah.
there, and it changed his life. So I love that that's one of the things, doing some mirror work.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's in the book. Okay, so
Yes.
that's pillar 2, acceptance, and then talking
3
about what it is.
is attunement. So getting back in the body, like really paying attention to your body. So I talk about different grounding techniques, and one is called the five senses. Sees with the senses, and it's basically every day you pick a sense and you just pay attention. Like so, today I'm going to use like smell. What do I smell? What do I enjoy when I smell it? Like is my look at my dog? He's a little stinky. It's just kind of really really paying attention, right? Do I like that smell? Does it trigger me? Like, how do I respond? Do I have certain triggers to smell, sight, taste, touch? And just really paying attention how your body responds to different sensations. And this will allow yourself to get back in touch because a lot of people who have had body based traumas, specifically sexual trauma, dissociate or disconnects from the body, right? So, this is
Yeah.
how do we get back in a body in a way that doesn't feel threatening, that feels safe.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so attunement,
Mhm.
getting back in the body, tuning into the body, being a part of your body instead of
Yes.
dissociating
Yes.
or dissociation. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's really good too. So you have these various, this is this outlined in the book then?
Mhm.
It,
Yep.
it it actually outlines like
Yep.
things you can do
Mhm.
to actually do this. Oh gosh, I gotta get your book right away. Yeah, it really sounds quite amazing. Okay, so that's the third pillar, and then the fourth one was atonement.
And then
You
atonement.
said?
So, yeah, so when we think about atone, we think typically religion. You're atoning with God, right? So in the book, I talk about atoning with yourself, right? You are it, right? You are when we
Yeah.
talk about that, you are the I, the higher self, whatever. No matter your relationship with a different source, this is about you. So how do you atone with yourself? Like you say, people feel bad or they talk down to themselves. I was to blame, I effed up, or whatever the case may be. How do you begin to forgive yourself for just forgetting who you were? Because you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't cause
Right.
the trauma, right? But because of
Yeah.
the trauma, you might have forgotten who you were before it. And that's the only thing we need to forgive, period.
Mm.
And what does that
Mm.
look like to begin to atone? So we talk about it, and that's why I introduced the concept of therapeutic BDSM. But if we were to do this outside of that frame, we would go back through the first three pillars and it would be a much deeper awareness, a deeper look, really leaning in to those more tender spots,
Mhm.
and really aligning with who are we outside of our trauma, before our trauma? What does that look like? Can we reconcile with that self again?
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because I think about, often it feels as if we are actually feeling as if we should have more pain, that somehow more pain and suffering will somehow atone
Mhm.
for what somebody else did that
Mhm.
we had no control over. It's just like,
Exactly.
doesn't even make sense,
Yeah. Yeah. And this whole
because
idea of
atone, I mean, the
forgiveness.
word atone means at one,
Mhm.
at one meant being at one with yourself or with God or Christ or whatever your religious beliefs are. But the word itself, that's what it means. How do we come back into that at oneness with ourselves?
Yes.
Because half the things that I sometimes think about myself, I'm like, why in the world does your head spin that way? When
Mhm.
there wasn't one thing you could have done about this,
Mhm.
And sometimes it bugs me when people think, well, we'll blame our parents. I'm like, They didn't know either, and quit blaming my parents. I get so
Exactly.
mad. But again, they got to a place of peace, but boy, they did blame themselves too. Like, "Why didn't I know? Why didn't I see it? Why, blah, 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 blah," and then your head goes, and all of a sudden, you're, like, fractured in
Mhm.
all these pieces, and you can't put that puzzle back together because you can't do something about something you don't know is you don't know what you don't know, you don't know,
Exactly.
period.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. I love those 4 pillars. I can't wait to, get that out to our listeners and those that might be watching and just to say, "Hey, we wanna hear from you." Like, as you try these various practices and doing these exercises that our doctor, you rock, has now shared with us, what are your results? How are you feeling? Because I'm all about, let's get back to feeling good.
Mhm.
Reach for
Mhm.
a better feeling.
Mhm.
If you're feeling angry, what's right above anger on that tonal scale that I learned once? What's
Mhm.
right above it? Reach for that. What is it? Revenge? Maybe it's revenge.
Mhm.
Reach for revenge,
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
I don't know. I can't remember, but it
Let's
was
say
really an
passion.
interesting thing.
Passion.
Passion. Yeah. That might
Mhm.
be the next one. That whatever is above that and above that until you
Yeah.
can get back to some kind of joy,
Yeah.
some happy, which isn't as great as joy, which is kind of my ultimate way to be like, well, if you could just stay in your joy, just, what's going to make you feel the most joyful today? Just do
Mhm.
that.
Yes.
Because it's almost like you're retraining your brain and your body and your mind and your emotions to actually experience what feels good.
Yes.
We're so used to feeling what feels bad
Yes.
that it's almost become like, I don't want to say we're addicted to it, but it's almost like we don't even know how to feel good.
Mhm. We get attached to the
And it's now
pain.
to me,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the pain body,
Mhm.
like Eckhart Tolle says. And
Mhm.
And, if you had parting words for your daughters, I don't know how old they are. I don't know if they're going off to, college or marriage, or you look really young, so probably not yet. They're probably pretty young. But if they were, and you were kind of saying, if I could just, if you would just remember one thing, or two things. My dad always said two things. He would say that all the time, two things, and he'd tell you two things. Um, what would that be?
Number 1 would probably be, uh, the audacity of authenticity. Dare to be your damn self, period. Dare to be yourself. Yes.
Dare to be your damn self.
Mhm.
That's one.
Yes, that's one.
Audacious, what were the first 2 words you said?
The
How'd you
audacity of authenticity.
audacity of authenticity. Oh, I love that. Dare to
Mhm.
be your damn self. Oh, that's so good. Okay. That's one.
Mhm.
One more.
And the other one would be your body has wisdom. Listen to her.
Mhm.
Listen.
How out of tune are we? How out of touch are we with our bodies?
So out of tune. Yeah.
Think we're more out of tune because we're surrounded by so many distractions? Or do you think it's just we've never been encouraged to tune in?
Both, right? I think our relationship with our body has been dulled by so many things, right? From the social media or the media we have, from the food that we eat, from the fact that we're not out and about in nature anymore. Like, I think it's just been dulled. And so we have to be intentional about maintaining a connection with our body. We have to put in the work.
We have to put in the work. There it is. It is work, but it's the kind of work that can bring great peace and joy. And I love your 2 things. That was the perfect way to end this conversation. I hope we have many more. We're going to start some round tables, and I'm like, "Oh, we definitely have to have you there." You're going to be the voice of so many things that I cannot wait, and I hope you would join us again when we toss out some topics that we really are passionate about and we hear from voices that have the expert piece, but also the personal piece. And thank you for sharing some of those personal um, reasons and whys that you're here, today. And as a mama bear and a and a mother and a dog lover, as I've seen your dog a couple times in the background back there. I too am a dog lover. I often say if we could just be a little bit more like our furry friends, just really be in the moment, find a little peace, get somebody to, or do it yourself, scratch your head, to just eat some good food and just to try and just stay in a s in I don't know if you can't try to stay in a state. You just be in a state of kind of continual, just love. Love what's around you, love yourself, be in atonement with yourself. I really enjoyed our conversation. That was really, really good. Thank you so much. Is there any closing words you'd like to leave with us?
I just want to say thank you, for giving me an opportunity to be here and to speak. Yeah, stay anchored in your authenticity. Like, stay anchored in it and don't allow anything to outside of yourself to move you. Your own validation is enough.
All right. You heard it here first, folks, from Dr. You Rock. And thank you so much again,
Thank you.
Yolanda Renee Ruckman.